Okay, hi. Today we're here on FabCity Now. This is episode number 6. Still trying to figure out how to get all of this stuff executed properly. But I've got a great guest today, Ilana Preuss. Preuss, like Dr. Seuss. I just was given that to help my brain remember this. From Recast City. And we're going to kind of dive in today talking about economic development and ultimately how to revive and save your downtown with small scale manufacturing. So Ilana, why don't you just give me a few minute intro to yourself and the background of your work.
Thank you, Danny, and thank you for inviting me to join you today. I'm excited to talk through all of this with you and with everybody else. So my name is Ilana Preuss. I have a firm called Recast City, and I work with communities to bring small-scale manufacturing into downtowns and into economic development strategy. The work I do is really based on my background in city planning. I worked for a long time working with communities to redevelop downtowns before downtowns were cool, and in big cities and in rural areas, all about what does it take to bring a place back to life, but also to retain what's special about it. And I found along the way that small scale manufacturing, which I define as any business that's making a tangible product that you can replicate or package, they bring a special something. They can fill storefronts and be this very cool thing that you can look in the window and see somebody make something, which really becomes a draw for foot traffic, but they also sell online so that they're not dependent on the foot traffic that's there today, but they're actually bringing revenues into the community. It's also a really inclusive business sector. People make stuff across every part of our population. And so we can make sure we're benefiting all the different parts of our population that maybe didn't get support in the past. And the jobs pay better. We have a huge economy of service jobs that pay pretty poorly right now. And so when we look at small scale manufacturing businesses, on average, they're paying 50 to 100% more than retail or service jobs. So when we're looking at how do we help people build wealth, how do we help more people get out of poverty or underemployment, this is one of the ways out. And so it's been really exciting to work with communities all over the country who recognize that their downtown is worth it, their people are worth it, and are willing to try something different. And we work with them to do exactly that.
A couple of things you said there in that introduction just triggered something for me. One was when you were talking about just kind of service-based jobs, which is a lot of our economy, or at least it was. During the pandemic, a lot of that's been dramatically reduced.
Right.
But one of the things that I saw early on that I wasn't happy with, I was reviewing the city of Oakland, which is where I'm primarily based. I was reviewing their 5-year economic development plan for the city itself. And they put in kind of 3 tiers of focus. Retail being one primary focus, and then manufacturing was something they would start in kind of year 3 or 4, start working on it. And as soon as I read that, I said, wait a minute, but your whole purpose, your whole point of economic redevelopment is to provide quality jobs to people. It seems like you're purely just here pandering to big box stores to get the tax revenue. And that was the primary motivation there, was just to get the tax revenue in, not necessarily about supporting the base of people.
Not necessarily. I mean, a focus on retail can be because they want to make sure that the storefronts are filled so that people feel like there's a vibrancy to a place. And I think it is important to fill storefronts. So it would depend on sort of what they mean by retail. And it could be focused on the big boxes. It could really be focused on that sort of corridor energy that you have in different parts of our cities, neighborhood main streets, right, and neighborhood commercial centers, and not just downtown Oakland. But it's true. Most cities have different kinds of business recruitment incentives. They're focused on bringing the one big business into town that's going to save their economy. And especially when we get outside of the top 5 cities or so, folks are really competitive about recruitment and spend millions of dollars on it. The problem is most of the time that recruitment dollar doesn't actually impact their decision about where they were going to go. They were going to go there or not anyway. And a lot of times those jobs are either focused on super high paying jobs or fairly low wage jobs. And or they're just focused on the high wage jobs, and the benefit, the indirect benefit that a lot of economic development impact analysis talks about is the indirect job creation. And the indirect job creation is all those retail and service jobs. So a lot of places aren't talking about the kinds of jobs they want to create. They're just sort of waving their hands and talking about jobs in general. And we know not every job is created equal. We know that there are not enough living wage jobs in the country. Right now, there aren't even enough jobs in the country, right? We have super high unemployment because of the pandemic. And that we need to look at how we're recruiting. If we're recruiting, what kind of jobs are we recruiting for? But also, how are we building our own, right? How can we grow our own strong living wage jobs within our communities? And there's absolutely a world of benefit in the entrepreneurs who create their own service businesses that build wealth for them, for their families, and pay living wage jobs. But then there's this untapped sort of hidden gem that I think about with small scale manufacturing, which is everybody who makes the things. And there's huge markets for the consumer facing products, but also the supply chain into big business, right? The high tech widget that somebody else needs can be made in the US. And I think one of the things that's interesting to me about the pandemic is that there is more focus on how do we create a secure supply chain. And there's more demand for creating those widgets domestically, which I think is a great opportunity. And then pairing that with the consumer product side of it, there's a lot of interesting things that people are making in it. And it's just another piece to add into this toolbox that we have.
Right. I guess for me, the primary pushback, well, one, I was happy to see that they put manufacturing as a focus in there.
Absolutely.
But the pushback really was, well, why are you doing that first? Why are you focusing on the low wage, low skilled jobs?
Right.
Because, you get that as a byproduct of a vibrant economy. If you bring in manufacturing, if you grow more manufacturers, you're
Right.
going to have more retail that grows out of that. You're going to have more need for the restaurants down the street to service all the employees there. To me, it makes more sense to start with the thing that builds a better infrastructure and backbone that is going to attract more of these, service jobs and low wage, low skill jobs.
Right. And the other thing to think about, especially with a hot market like Oakland, is space for this, right? I mean, Oakland is a perfect example of this, but this is true in all of our hot markets. The demand for land and for buildings is very, very high, which means the price per square foot of a building is really high. And so a city that wants to make sure that there is space for small scale manufacturing has to actually put the policies, the zoning, the support and the incentives in place to make sure that there is space for small scale manufacturing in the city over the long haul, and preserving that as an important use for the city. And honestly, not every place does that. They've decided that housing is going to be more important, and they don't care how far people want to travel for jobs, as opposed to saying we actually want to make sure that there are both high wage jobs and strong living wage jobs within our community, so that we're supporting all of the people who live here.
Right, and one of the more interesting pieces is that now that they've had turnover in their economic development team within the city, they've scrapped that first part of the plan. Now the city of Oakland is entirely focused. All of their energy of economic development workforce is all focused on manufacturing.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah, they've decided now just to double down on that concept and really begin to kind of push that forward. And I think it's a great thing and it's a great idea, but another pushback that I always have with it is it's typically focusing on attracting the larger manufacturers. It's on the large buildings filled with big businesses that hire 50 people or more. Right. And yeah. And that's the small scale manufacturing that you kind of represent is kind of the opposite to that. It's like it's great to attract business to your city, but really when you attract business to your city, they're not coming and banking locally. They're not keeping all the resources locally that they're an extraction entity. They're coming here. Yes, they're going to bring jobs. They're going to bring some employment, but they're extracting resources from your community.
Right. Absolutely.
Versus if you grow them and you seed the small scale manufacturing, you put in more skills, more focus on the training, more entrepreneurial support, subsidizing retail space or whatever it may be to kind of get these smaller businesses started, then you actually have people that are investing in the community and they're growing the community and growing the wealth of the community rather than extracting resources out.
Yes. I mean, you're certainly part of the choir. This is not a surprise. But I think that a lot of economic development departments have just been used to doing recruitment for a very long time. It's what has been taught for 50 years.
Right.
One of the things that I find very inspiring is that as I work with more cities, small and medium-sized cities, they have economic development directors that recognize that recruitment isn't going to solve all the problems, and that there's a place for it, and there is a place for it, but that they really need to invest in their people and who they have now as a way to grow in a way with a solution that nobody else has, right? Because nobody else has those people and with those skills. And so when you grow your economy based on the people you have in your community, you're creating something unique, and you can support it in a different way. I actually created a checklist called the tornado checklist, because I feel like there's like a tornado came through all of our economies, and if we're really going to rebuild it so that it's stronger, not only stronger in general, but stronger for more people, right? Because a lot of people and a lot of places have been left behind for a long, long time. And I think one of the things we need to address coming out of the pandemic is that we need to make sure that we're helping more people in more places. But so that if the tornado came through, we actually have a pretty clear checklist of what it means to rebuild in a stronger way. And it's actually this combination of business development support for people in our community and the right kinds of spaces, both for starting businesses and scaling businesses. And I think it's really important to think about those two pieces together, because it has to go hand in hand, the business development support and the space. There's a lot of communities I talk to that have tons of vacant storefronts, a lot of downtowns that they got emptied out over the last 20, 30, 40 years, and they never came back to life. The leadership never really figured out what they were supposed to do. And when we talk about the spaces, sometimes now there are service businesses in there instead of retail. They don't really know what to do with it. And one of the first questions I ask them always is, what kind of business development support do you have? And either there's radio silence, or they'll say something like, we have facade grants, which is great. Don't get me wrong. It's important to make sure that the front of the building looks nice, but the space is only one of the two parts of the puzzle. And so one of the things that's been really interesting is to talk with communities about what does business development support look like in general, but specifically, what does business development support look like for small scale manufacturing? And how do we really invest energy and time in that, like we did for the tech sector, right? We had tons of solutions and models that we created for the technology sector to help startups and businesses that want to scale, but also just to teach the basic skills in technology, right? All of the coding classes, all of the UI classes, and we can do the exact same thing in small scale manufacturing, teach the basic skills, show people how to do startups if that's what they want to do, and then also help people scale it. That's what they want to do. But it takes this combination of business development and space solutions that really sort of are this set of ladder that you can grow on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the city of Oakland, once again, it's going to be one of my primary examples, but they have a person hired in their economic development department explicitly for tech. The K-12 school district has a person sitting at the district that is focusing explicitly on coding.
Right.
And then they have a series of 24 teachers throughout the district that focus entirely on computer programming, which is great.
Yeah, that's fantastic. We have to create more opportunity for coding for more people. No question.
But at the same time, the city of Oakland doesn't have anybody to focus explicitly on manufacturing. They don't, and the K-12 school district has one person in the administrative level that focuses on all things manufacturing, all things skilled trades, all things apprenticeship, anything that's dirty, non-traditional, non-4-year education route.
Right.
And one person throughout the whole district to kind of carry all of that work. And so the investment in the infrastructure is not there, and they're not putting their money where their mouth is. At least they haven't in the past. Hopefully they're changing their tune now with their new interests.
Well, and other cities are doing it, right? I mean, there are other places in the country where they are investing in this, and they are putting it in their K through 12, and they are putting it in the community college, and one of my projects, Columbia, Missouri, right? This is something that the school district is working on. The community college has an advanced manufacturing technical program. They applied for federal EDA funding to open a makerspace that would be a partnership between the community college and the public, right? And I worked with the improvement district where it's located to help them figure out how to put small-scale manufacturing along this corridor, because the property owners and the city recognize that this could be a competitive edge for this area. So they're making it happen. I mean, they're spitting out phenomenally trained people who can go work in advanced manufacturing. They'll get those communities that will both recruit more of the larger manufacturing because they're training people up, right. And they're also the folks that will end up spitting out more business owners because they're training people in the skills. Once you get the jobs often if you get the job in the bigger industry, some of those people are who spin out eventually to start up the new businesses that are filling some gap that they've recognized. I mean, there's also a great opportunity to teach entrepreneurship in our schools, and really teach people how, not as a business class, but as a creative way to really create your independence and to live a life that you want, regardless of where you come from or your background or your family history or anything of those things. Because entrepreneurship is an amazing way for people to create their own path forward.
Yeah, I mean, you're kind of singing the tune of my Fab Lab models of like why I push and kind of promote these things is because, Fab Lab, and especially when you bring it into school, and I kind of have this mantra is, institutional change requires the institutions. So many times I've had plenty of people come back and say, wow, this is really great and you're doing really good, but why are you putting up with all of the BS that you have to with the education system? And it's really back to, if we're going to have that institutional impact, we really need the institutions to move, not just to build something outside of them and try to leave them in the dust, because you can't leave them in the dust. And they also bring in a lot of funding, and we want to be able to redirect some of that funding into positive directions. But entrepreneurship is a huge thing that I typically see and promote within the Fab Labs. One of my community college Fab Labs, we're allowed to have free community access to that lab, which the first one I built, they said absolutely no way in hell are you going to let anybody in this place that's not a student. And they even pushed back for high school kids getting into the community college, and they said, you guys are just completely insane to not see the value.
Right.
But we would continually bring in projects, paid projects from the community. Right. People in the community show up. We had one project come in, and it was a local shop that wanted Ouija boards, and we had a cool UV or dye sublimation printer that we had, and we were able to churn those out and make these Ouija boards. Another one was a very simple thing. Someone wanted to make these special like dominoes bracelets, and they just needed all of the dominoes drilled out. Right. And we would always take those projects as they come in. The lab or the school itself kind of brokers the deal, and most of the stuff we do under the table in the dark of night, because we're not supposed to really be doing these things.
You sure you want to be talking about that on video, right?
Yeah, whatever. I don't work for any of these places. They just give me money to try to help them. So
okay.
But we kind of act as a middleman to broker the deal and give the student an experience. Okay, well, here's the client. Here's the client needs. You need to understand what their needs are, what the outcomes are, what the timeline is, how much, estimate your time, estimate any costs and expenses involved, and then go through and produce this thing and turn it back. And we were seeing probably once a week. We're seeing a job come through once a week, and we're handing that right over to students. And for many of these students, because we're helping them get started. We're doing the hard work by being the middleman to do the negotiation, to get everything set up for them. So they just kind of get the winning experience. It's like, well, yeah, but last week you taught me how to use the drill press. I know how to do that. I could drill out 500 of these things, no problem. And then we're like, cool, but we're going to make a jig. So let me show you how we can do this at scale by making a jig. So here's what you want to do. Go do it. We're going to leave you free. Go off and make the jig yourself. Use whatever tools, machines you have access to and you feel comfortable with. Use those. Make the jig. We'll come back and give you some assistance, and then plug you in. And then all of a sudden, you from something that would have been a really big pain in the butt to drill 500 of these little dominoes out on the drill press without the jig, that would have ended up making them, $8 an hour, maybe if they're lucky. And now all of a sudden they were able to speed it up dramatically, and now they're making $40 an hour.
Right.
And some of these were giving these projects to high school students, because there's a high school that's on campus as well. Mm-hmm. So now they're making $40 an hour to do a thing that they just learned the basic skills of 2 weeks ago. Right. And that's all someone needs. Like, just give them a good positive experience to get kicked off, and they're gonna be on their way. And if we can surround them with the scaffolding support to, like, okay, what do you do next? How do you sell your own service now? How do you go get your own customer now? How do you put up a website? How do you create an Etsy account? Like, how do you do all these little things? All of a sudden, you've just launched somebody forward. And whether or not they choose to go into business for themselves, or now we just gave them a tool that they can use to make some side money while they go to college.
Right. Absolutely.
So, and so I really promote the idea of the entrepreneurship, because, it's really when you start to use the digital fabrication equipment, that's where you get the scale. Because now once you come up with a really good design, and you've prototyped it, and you ran it through laser cutter 25 times, and you assembled it and kind of figured out all the quirks and the bugs, well, guess what? To make another one, you go push that button. And to make another one, you push that button. And if you get good enough at it, now you pay that other student over there $20 an hour to push the button for you, while you make $20 an hour on top of that.
Right.
And you can make stuff consistently, and at greater and greater scales. And we've had people come into the labs and go buy their own equipment now. They came in, they learned the skill, they saw the value, they made some money, and now they've invested in their own equipment, and they're on their own.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think in each city and each community, it's the approach is going to have to be different, right? I think that from my work with city leadership, most of the time the question is about, how is this going to impact our tax base? How is this going to make people proud to live here? How is this going to bring our downtown back to life, right? And I think that it has to all be framed up in this perspective of, I always look at it from the short-term perspective. What can we do in the next 3 to 12 months that's going to make a real difference for a lot of people in the community? And that the only way we're going to know those answers is by talking to people. So talking to people who might already be in a fab lab, like what you're describing, talking to people who already have businesses where they make stuff, talking to property owners on Main Street in the downtown, or people who might have an Etsy shop that they're doing in part-time. One of the things that I find fascinating is there are a lot of communities that are very dismissive of people who sell on Etsy or sell part-time. And one of the things I keep explaining to them is that these are your future full-time entrepreneurs, that not all of them are going to be full-time entrepreneurs, but a handful of those people are going to want to become full-time businesses, scale if they have the opportunity, and can be a solid part of your long-term business strategy in the community. And so how do we keep finding more of these people and encouraging more of these people to become part of what's going on in the community? As you know, there are some places that have done a great job with creating the brand, creating the certification of made in, so there's the Knoxville has the Maker City brand that they've created, made in Baltimore, Seattle. Obviously, SF Made has done a phenomenal job of that. But making people be proud of being a part of something is an important part of that, and making sure that we're doing it with a diverse community of business owners, and being really purposeful and intentional about the outreach that we're doing, and bringing in business owners that are from the diversity of our population, so that we're making sure that the benefits of building these businesses and scaling these businesses, in fact, does build across our population. But I think that a lot of places get that what we did before doesn't really work anymore, especially now. A lot of places haven't had what we consider traditional retail for a long time. They just didn't know that there was another option of something they could do. And so when we connect up this idea of a makerspace or a fab lab, where you can really incubate business owners within your community, and then actually have them on Main Street and have them in storefronts, either still sharing those tools or getting their own, like you were describing. I think there's a really exciting opportunity to change the trajectory of communities that that haven't had a lot of hope for a long time. There's huge number of cities in the Midwest and in the South, sort of the center of different parts of the country, where they sort of hollowed out a long time ago, and people really haven't figured out how to turn that around. And so I think there's a really exciting opportunity to help those places come back to life and really show the people who live there now that there is worth in this place, and that there's an opportunity to do something really exciting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and for me, that obviously there are a number of things that have kind of led to this hollowing out of these small towns. I mean, offshoring of manufacturing was probably the largest driver, and and all the policies that helped that happen in the first place.
Right.
But when all of that started to happen, then we started to see a reduction in vocational education in our school system, because while we no longer have these big industries that we're employing, hundreds of thousands of people, so we don't need to train hundreds of thousands of people with these skills anymore.
Right.
And I think a very unintended consequence of doing so is we've seen this massive lull in engineers, in architects, in these kind of higher thinking jobs that do require an understanding of mechanics and hands-on and machinery and tools and all this other stuff. And I don't think most people understand that connection. They don't realize that when you got rid of shop class, you weren't just getting rid of the all the factory workers that we were training to go work for Ford. You were getting rid of the seed that inspired someone to become an engineer.
Right.
I think any engineer over the age of 40, if you ask them, likely all of them are going to have a very positive shop class experience to share with you.
Right.
Because
shop class disappeared from my high school between my brother and myself. Mm-hmm. Right. It was this blip of time where it disappeared from our school, and it's not just the engineers and the architects. I mean, it's learning how to, or knowing how to think with your hands, right? And spatial reasoning is just it's another exercise of your brain, no different than any of the other ways you learn in school, right? Math, science, history, English, whatever it is. It's just stretching your brain in another direction. And so I think that it contributes to a lot of different ways that we learn. I think that one of the exciting parts of the maker movement is that it really promoted very broadly this concept that, education and making things is important, that there is a benefit to it. And, that drew me into it a long time ago, to participate into it because of that. But I do think that there weren't very many people who said, okay, what happens as this grows up? What happens as we professionalize this? How do we expand this into the way we do economic development and not just education? Because if we're just doing the education, I actually think we're missing a whole boat, because we don't have the economic incentives, the policies, any of the programs that really support this business sector. So we sort of, everyone falls off a cliff at some point if that's what we're doing. So I think that's an important piece to add into the thinking about it. But I think that it takes also leadership, right? We have to show local elected leaders that this is something that's really important. We have to show people that this is worthy of investment. We know that our local governments are super strapped for cash right now because of the pandemic. And we need to show that this is in fact a way to build a broader base for the local economy for the immediate term, but also for the long haul, so that it is more resilient. The local economy is more resilient for the long haul. One of the things I talk about is that when we think about our downtowns, there are a lot of communities that went for the mall version of their downtown, right? They want the H&M, they want the Gap, they want the whatever the chain stores are that used to be at the mall that mostly closed down. I was just talking to a community this week about it. They have this great pedestrian walkway in their downtown, but it was used to be all national chain stores. And those are all contracting, right? They're all shrinking their footprint. They're all getting rid of locations that aren't top prime locations. But it's also not why people go out. People go out to walk around the place because they want an experience. And I know people aren't walking around so much right now because of the pandemic, and that limits it to some degree, but it will come back. And we have this really interesting opportunity with small scale manufacturing and people who are making all different kinds of things, that they can be the storefronts that you can't find anywhere else, right? Even if it's a a jeweler or a candle shop or a person working in wood or metal, they're making things, and they're making things in a way that nobody else is. And so you have the opportunity to really showcase the flavor of your community, what makes it unique, that special something about the community that nobody else can replicate. And I think a lot of our downtowns have lost that. And that's part of what, we're working for communities to get back.
Mm-hmm. And so I want to just kind of get into your background, and I'm curious as how people kind of arrive to where they are, because it's an uphill battle with the work that you do. And I think, and for myself, I've seen the last probably 3-4 years, I've seen that battle get easier because there's more acceptance that the world is changing, and that there's a lot of value in these kind of things. But what was it that kind of push you in this direction in the first place? Like, why are you solving this problem?
That's a great question. So my background is in city planning and community development. I worked in the world of smart growth and downtown redevelopment for a very long time, and ran different technical assistance programs at the federal level, worked with communities all over the country. I worked with folks to figure out what was the small T politics of making great places. So the housing, the transportation, like what are all the things that we need to do to bring a place back to life? And we always talked about this job housing balance. We need jobs housing balance so that people don't have to travel so far, they can have good jobs near where they live. But nobody ever talks about what kind of job. And nobody ever talks about what kind of business is what makes the biggest difference. And so 7-8 years ago, I went on this exploration to figure that out. And so I did this series of events called In the City, looking at tech businesses, food businesses, transportation businesses, and then ultimately production businesses. And the last event we did was called Production in the City. And I researched what real estate developers were doing about this, right? Because it has to do with space also. And I found that there were a number of really, really forward-thinking big real estate developers that were looking at putting product businesses as sort of a centerpiece of their projects, because they said it would create it as a destination, it would brand it, and that would actually help create higher property values in the surrounding area for the rest of the development. At which point I said, I feel like anybody can do this. And I started talking to folks about how small scale manufacturing can really be this hidden gem, this missing piece of how we are investing in places and in our economy. And I always give a lot of talks, and I gave a talk about this in North Carolina, and I thought people's heads were going to pop off. They were talking about how this is exactly what we need, right? This is 7 years ago that I gave this talk. This is exactly what we need. I've never heard anybody talk about this. This is exactly where we need to go. There was some guy in the audience who was phenomenal about it all, who since has created a makerspace, right? All of this, it sort of tapped into the pride that people feel about making stuff, right? And that's universal. And so I created Recast City that combines my background in community development and city planning with this part of economic development, really focusing in on the role that small-scale manufacturing businesses can serve to make a stronger local economy that includes more people from a diversity of background, and that brings our downtowns back to life, because there are so many ways that this business sector benefits the community by filling in the storefronts, by creating more living wage jobs, by creating more opportunity for more people. And it works in downtowns, and it works in neighborhood main streets. And sometimes they scale and they need to leave town and go to the industrial park or the industrial area nearby. But most of the time, these businesses are really small and thrive in storefronts and create tons of energy and excitement around them. And that's what we focus on.
Okay. So you went off on a personal venture to kind of figure this out, and then when you were finally sharing that out with the world was ready for it. People were standing on.
It's very surprising. Okay. And in Recast City, we've been here for 6 years, just about. We're about to come up on a 6-year anniversary, and it is, like you said, it's growing, I think, exponentially. The understanding that we need to do something different in economic development, and understanding that small scale manufacturing businesses, product businesses, can be this very special asset for a community, has spread at an amazing rate across the country. I talk to folks now where I'm not convincing them that this is a good idea. They already get that this is a good idea. They want to know what to do about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was similar for me. Just a few weeks ago, I had this middle school call me up and say, "Hey, I want a Fab Lab." I'm like, hold on. I haven't spent 2 years lobbying you yet. Why are you at this place already on your own? We're like, no, we saw what you did over there, and we know we want that for us.
That's great.
And so, the world is turning around and saying, wait a minute, they're coming to look for these solutions rather than having to really sell the solutions to them in the first place.
Right.
For me, education has been really the big piece that I focused on, and because I'm concerned about all of the people we see on the street. I'm concerned about all of the crime we see in the neighborhoods, and I have this personal feeling, and one day I'm going to hopefully get some funding and do a little bit of research on it, but to look into when we cut off shop class, when you eliminate that education, what happened to your home ownership, your local home ownership in the community? What happened to the crime rates? What happened to college? Number of people going on to college. What happened to these other things? Because we used to have other tools and other ways to keep people's attention. So they shop class was a bastion of glory for some section of the population going to school, and looking in Oakland, they've got something like some ridiculous amount, like 40% of the students don't graduate. 40%.
Really?
Yeah, they don't graduate, and out of that there's a small percentage. I think it gets almost down into single digits of the number of the percentage of students that graduate college, and yet we have thrown hundreds of millions of dollars at this problem of trying to get as many people as we can into college, and they're down close to single digits from how many percent of the students actually get through four-year college. And personally, I think part of it is we lost this other learning modality of this hands-on education. For a person to see the viability in learning a skill and being able to apply it. When you went to auto class, and you learned how to change oil today, guess what? Tomorrow you can make $20. You can use that skill you learned today to make $20 tomorrow. You can change your neighbor's oil. And we're giving people economic opportunity. We're giving them a reason to come back the next day and well, but yeah, if I can make $20 changing oil, what about if I can change the brake pads? What about if I can fix the electrical? What about the next thing? And helping this whole other population that we really have kind of forgotten about in our educational system, and helping them get access to education and give them a reason to show up in the first place.
Right.
I was involved in a larger convening across the city of Oakland that was pulling together, they call them these kind of equity circles, and they're trying to address the issues of equity and wealth. It was I think the wealth impact tables is what it was, and they had kind of four subsectors of these tables, and they were just saying, okay, let's look at wealth building for the citizens of the city, and how do we make this equitable and accessible to everybody.
Right.
And all four groups ended up at the exact same place. The same place was chronic absenteeism in school. That was the number one thing. I said, this is it, because if you're not getting to school, you're not getting your education, you're not going to go forward, and there's reasons that are preventing you from going to school in the first place.
Right.
Yet, out of all these conversations, and they paid some high-paid consultants to come in and facilitate all the conversations and move forward, and yet I was the only person that stood up and raised my hand and said, how about we address the problem that school kind of sucks? How about we address what we're teaching the kids and how we're teaching them? Yeah, I don't, it's wonderful to give them backbone support, give them, access to more counselors, maybe even some financial resources, other things that will really help them as well. But if school was a place that they all wanted to be,
they're
all going to do everything they can to get there. People are going to do everything they can to go to school. Yet I was the only person who raised this. And as soon as I said it, I see like so many people kind of in the group being like, oh, yeah, but they have to like hide it. They have to, like, but school sucks. Let's fix that problem if we want people to go there in the first place. And
Right.
and so many people were just nodding their head and agreeing to that, but yet it's too controversial of an idea. They
Well,
weren't.
I think it's also it's a hard question to solve for in their
Right,
minds, right?
right. But it addresses a lot of their problems. Like if you give
Yeah.
them, if you make it like Disneyland, they're all going to want to get there. So let's figure out
Right.
how do we make school like Disneyland, and then they're gonna solve some of their own problems, some of the
Right.
problems that are preventing them from getting there in the first place.
Yeah. There's no
So
question. There's problems with our education system. That's.
yeah, and
I don't
that's a whole
work on education with Recap City for almost that very reason. That there's a lot of people working on education, like you.
right. It's a tough crack.
I'll focus on economic development.
Well, so one of the and all of this work for me kind of drove me into this FabCity direction.
Right.
And 2 years ago, almost 2.5 years ago now, I was successful in lobbying the mayor of Oakland to sign on to the Global FabCity Initiative,
Right.
which is this audacious goal to produce 50% of everything you consume within city limits by the year 2024. So there's this timeline that
It seems like Danny is frozen. Am I the only one here?
Hi, I'm still here.
Hi, Joe.
Hi. Enjoying the talk so far. Usually he reboots.
Okay. I mean, I'm happy to keep talking about things, but we've lost. Oh, there he goes.
Wait, there he goes. Okay, maybe he'll come back. Well, it was very interesting.
Thank you. Always good to do things live and see what technology is going to work and what's not going to work.
Right, right.
But
yeah,
I love talking about this stuff.
As the behind-the-scenes director, I wasn't expecting to make an appearance, but
you never know when it's going to happen.
You never know.
Exactly.
Oh wait, he's coming back.
Okay.
See him back there.
This part out. But kind of where I was going with that is I'm just trying to dive in and kind of throw this idea at you of producing 50% of everything you consume. Like to you, is that a completely crazy idea? Where does your mind go with this concept?
That's a great question. I think it is completely crazy. Not a bad crazy, but I think it is completely crazy. I think there's a lot of economic factors that go along with that, right? I mean, it is still cheaper for people to buy the vast majority of their stuff made overseas. And we have to go into this with an acknowledgement that a lot of people can't afford the prices of what it takes to make things locally, at least right now, the way our economy is set up right now. And so if we want to produce and have people consume 50% of everything that they need locally, then we have to look at the cost factors for a lot of people. I think I almost feel like it's easy, or at least pretty straightforward to me, to think about, who needs to make stuff, how do we need to make them, how do we train people up to make those things, and how do you support those businesses? I know that's what I focus on. So that part seems straightforward to me. But the economics behind how to make that affordable to more people, I think, is a really, really hard question that actually includes, international trade deals, of which I'm not an expert. So I don't think it's a straightforward set of tasks of just training people up. I think that one of the ways we get there is training more people on the tools, helping more people become business owners that make stuff, and a city can make a commitment to procure whatever the widgets are and whatever the stuff, the consumer products that they need. Other anchor institutions like hospitals or universities or colleges or school districts can also make the commitment of buying these things. But again, they're all going to cost more based on that. And that means that the jurisdiction or the anchor institution has to commit that funding to become a prime purchaser of those things, which may then lower the cost for other people to buy that. But it's really a shifting of resources. The thing I would say on top of that is that it's not just about making it be produced locally, it's about who's making it locally, right? We have a history of systemic racism in our economic development strategy. Our Black-owned businesses, our Latino-owned businesses have not gotten a fair crack at city funding, at economic development incentives, pretty much ever. And so if we're going to look at how we're going to invest locally to be able to produce more locally, then I think we have a responsibility to say the diversity of our community needs to benefit from this, and the people who haven't gotten the support in the past need to be at the front of the line, and really do it from that perspective.
It's interesting because you kind of laid out my game plan for implementing this, which is one, go tap the city, the hospitals, the large institutions, and get them to just augment their existing preferential purchasing policies. Because the thing is, we don't have to get them to create new policies because they already have these. They already have them for small, medium enterprise, the women, minority-owned businesses. Like these are already systems that are in place. We're just getting them to augment it, just to add another caveat about produced locally.
Right.
And yes, if you can do that, and it does cost more money, but it only costs more money until you get to scale.
Right.
Because once you hit that scale, it doesn't cost you any more money. You can do it on par. And part of what China is doing right now is heavily investing in automation, heavily investing in machines to do a lot of the work so they can bring the price down lower. But we can also bring the same machines to the US. We can also use the same equipment here to perform the same tasks, and you're not paying for the shipping costs. You're not paying for all these other pieces.
Right.
And one of the big picture ideas with at least my vision of FabCity and how to manifest it is it's also the opportunity in completely re-engineering all of the stuff in the first place. Because if you're going
that part is exciting to you.
I'm trying to carve out my role in here is just to be like the king nerd of all of the stuff. I just want to go understand what's what and who's doing what and how to make things and what are the coolest ways to do it.
Yeah.
But when you completely re-engineer, because in order to really achieve that goal of local production, everything has to be re-engineered. Because we're trying to both produce it locally, but we're also trying to source it locally.
Yeah.
And you can't build buildings out of trees in the city of Oakland because there's no forests there. So we have to completely come up with a brand new, material to perform the same function.
Right.
And a lot of what I see is it's going to be a huge advancement, huge investment in biomaterials. It's going to be growing the raw materials that you're then converting and turning into product.
That's interesting. Yeah, but not something I've gone into the details about, but I'm excited to learn about them from you as you go along with this.
Right. Yeah. And I'm an armchair quarterback on a lot of this stuff, but I'm extremely curious about it. And really I'm saying, I'm just trying to look at, okay, if we do take this serious and not just think of it, it's a kitschy thing, but let's set a real goal to get there. Then also, in addition to re-engineering the way we make things and looking at biomaterials and all these other things, we also have to have really good understanding of what we consume and how much of it, and what we produce and how much of it, and how much of it stays here versus how much of it is exported outside of the city or outside of the country even.
Right.
And I think right there is there's a huge investment necessary just to get that data, but that data is extremely valuable. If you can understand the city of Oakland goes through 50,000 pairs of shoes every week, guess what? There's a huge market for making shoes. Like we've identified, there's a huge market for doing that.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to look at. I mean, I would definitely start with the procurement by the anchor institutions. There's so much purchasing power
Yeah, it just becomes a driver for anybody who has capacity that doesn't need the wraparound resources, the entrepreneurship support or whatever. They can, all of a sudden there's a market for them. We created a market.
Right. And I spoke to a phenomenal economic development director in, where was he, Michigan, who literally does it one by one. Like he approaches major anchors, major anchor institutions or big businesses in the region and says, what are 2 or 3 things that you could buy locally? Or what are 2 or 3 things you buy from really far away that you'd like to buy locally? And then he goes back out into the community and says, okay, who's making this thing, or who could make this thing? And if you could make it, here are the specs that they needed at. And he really starts he works as a matchmaker and goes one by one. And I honestly think it takes doing that for a while before it starts working and you start having a local marketplace. And I think that's going to be a pretty essential position to have filled, and not just sort of wave our hands and say, well, go procure, because they're not going to know where to find these people. Totally. I think there's a fair amount of hand-holding at the beginning. And then I think there's some really interesting models coming out of folks like Under Armour that wants to do local production and invest in the technology, at least as far as I can tell, invest in the technology to produce some of these pieces locally to sell within a specific market. Or there's a really interesting, I guess this is the reverse of it, a distributed production model for centralized use, Xometry, which is a platform where businesses can get a piece produced for themselves individually or a small batch of something, but Xometry uses a national, actually international network of small producers to create high spec, high precision pieces. So I think there's ways of sort of having those 2 pieces complement each other and be a part of it. But I honestly think it really comes down to a lot of relationship work at the beginning, where it is just talking to the people who are making the spending decisions, and doing the advocacy, like we talked about before, about making the case that spending money in this way has all of these other benefits, and being really, really clear about what those benefits are.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And the cities themselves are slowly kind of chipping away at these different pieces, and the role that I'm trying to play, and I continually kind of refer to myself as a systems engineer, is that I'm looking at the macro problem, I'm looking at what are the pieces necessary to solve the problem. See myself. Oh,
now I hear you.
Okay. Anyways, but I'm just constantly kind of plugging myself into these conversations, and I'm the one who's making the connections. I'm like, no, this department over here in your city, you need to go talk to them about this thing you just.
We got you back.
So yeah, but yeah, I'm constantly kind of finding myself as the connector to put them together. I'm helping the schools sync up with each other and build their career pathways, and nobody's really paying me to serve that role. I see the problem, and I'm like, wait a minute. If you just went and talked to Sam over here in this place, you would realize he has the solution to the problem that you've got right on your hands right now.
Yeah,
and it just takes that relationship building.
It does, and most people are, they're working really, really hard at the job that they had yesterday, right? And we're coming to them and saying, well, okay, you need to do these 7 other things, and they just don't. I mean, it's very realistic to say they just don't have bandwidth for it. And I mean, especially now with the pandemic and all the extra stressors in people's lives, I completely understand that. I think it's really a gift, right? When you or anybody else can go to a community and say, okay, let me help connect the dots and actually put it all together for you, so you understand here are the specific things you can do moving forward. My biggest fear is that, I don't know, this isn't you, but my biggest fear is people run around sort of talking about the connections that can be made, but not actually doing the work on the ground to make those connections and implement the ideas and the projects and the models. I think that, I mean, I come from the planning field, right? Like, planning field is all about long-term master plans and long-term ideas. And there's an absolute place for that. We need to have the long-term vision. But I think we also need a lot more people that say, okay, if that's the long-term vision, what are we doing today to move in that direction? What are we doing in 6 months to move in that direction? Who gets to benefit from this? How do they get to benefit from this? And let's be really, really purposeful about that.
Yeah, it's the Indians and the Chiefs. Like you need them both, but you can't just have the planning. You just can't just have the big ideas only and say, okay, here's a beautiful plan. It's beautifully designed. It's well articulated. It's got wonderful steps involved. But if you don't have anybody on the ground performing those steps, if you don't have anybody on the ground really even just testing the ideas in the first place, the ideas are irrelevant for the most part, because they need to be tested, and they need to be viable and really put to work.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
So I think that's probably a high note to leave us on here. So the last podcast, I was my Wi-Fi was a little bit spottier, and I had about 3 or 4 of those interruptions. So I'm very happy that that was only one major interruption this time.
Okay.
This is the nature of broadcasting from my RV here. So, but I really kind of appreciate your time and the conversation. We're strengthening each other's thoughts and going back and forth. It's good to kind of grow my brain a little bit. But I'm also very happy to kind of share this with more people out there, and really just kind of get the word out that there's great work happening, and there's, we're reinventing our local economies, through these approaches. If you want to just kind of plug your upcoming book, and your website, and I don't know if you want, what kind of people you're looking to attract into your life these days to keep yourself going forward.
Always attracting more people into my life. So for anybody who's interested in more information, you can check us out at recastcity.com, RECASTCITY, recastcity.com. And if you want to check out the Tornado Checklist, I think it's the most recent blog actually that's up on the website, which I invite you to check out that blog and download the checklist. It's a free tool that we offer to folks. And my book comes out in the spring 2021, Recast Your City, How to Save Your Downtown with Small Scale Manufacturing, will be released by Ilana Preuss in spring 2021. If you join me on my website and join my email list, you'll definitely be one of the first ones to know about it. And you can read all about it on the website too. Just check out where it says the book.
Cool. All right. Well, I'm looking forward to reading through that book, and just getting deeper into this stuff, because I can't solve the problems all by myself, and nor can anybody else. And it's really about kind of sourcing best practices from where they're at. And it seems like that's in part what you've done in your book, is really put a lot of those best practices in one place.
It's a how-to. The whole book is a how-to, how communities can take this on themselves and really figure out how to bring small-scale manufacturing businesses into the forefront to bring downtown back to life and strengthen their local economy.
Cool. All right. Well, once again, thank you for your time.
Thank you. Bye.
All right. Bye.